I'm Philip Sabin, and this video illustrates the gameplay of my Canvas Aces Deluxe total conversion using the counters from Carlo Amadeo's excellent Winged Victory board game of World War I air combat. Canvas Aces Deluxe is posted freely online, and the extra components required are included as an optional add-on within the second edition of Winged Victory, which is due to ship later in 2021. Canvas Aces is a separate freestanding game system, which now includes two distinct variants. The Grand Tactical version has 15-second turns, and each counter represents an entire flight of aircraft, or an observation balloon, ground target, or anti-aircraft battery. The new Tactical variant has 6-second turns, and each counter represents an individual plane. Although I retain Carlo's side-scrolling perspective, Canvas Aces reintroduces the third lateral dimension perpendicular to the board's surface, allowing aircraft to maneuver in 3 dimensions as they seek to get on one another's tails. Canvas Aces Deluxe is only one of the total conversions I've designed and progressively refined over the past few years, based on principles explained in my book, Simulating War. It is the World War I spin-off of my Grand Tactical Dogfight Deluxe and Ultra Tactical Fighter Duel Deluxe designs, both of which use the counters and data cards from Lee Brimacombe Wood's Wing Leader series of World War II air combat board games from GMT. I showcased Dogfight Deluxe in another recent video, so in this video I focus instead on the new tactical version of Canvas Aces, and specifically on my dedicated Solitaire sub-variant, covering the classic World War I contest between a patrolling fighter and a manoeuvring recon plane. This quick and simple Solitaire sub-variant makes an ideal introductory game and showcase for the conversion as a whole. All my designs may be downloaded freely from the I/O group for my book, or from the Board Game Geek pages for their parent games. As long as you own the parent games, the main extra component you will need to play my Dogfight and Canvas Aces conversions is this simple gridded sky board. You may make this yourself by printing onto blue card copies of the grid template which I provide in the rules, or buy it as an add-on to the second edition of Winged Victory. This add-on also includes a printed rulebook, professionally produced aircraft data cards and record sheet, all the small tracking dice you will need, and beautiful large cloud panels. As a special bonus, the back of the double-sided board has exactly the large hex grid which you need to play my Fighter Duel Deluxe design using Wing Leader counters. Owners of Wing Leader can hence get 3 for the price of 1, since the add-on contains the board, cloud panels and tracking dice needed to play all 3 of my conversions. The unique feature of my sky grid is that the vertical dimension models not just height above the ground, as in the parent games, but also the lateral dimension, perpendicular to the board's surface. Hence, my board portrays a 3D corridor of airspace, as shown here, at a varying height above the ground. The corridor is 5,000 yards long and 4,000 feet high in the Grand Tactical version of Canvas Aces, or 2,000 yards long and 1,600 feet high in the Tactical variant. The board is in 4 sections, and these may be cycled forward or back, so that bomber or recon aircraft always remain in the heart of the playing area. Each of the 96 boxes on the board contains 5 layered blocks, as shown on the left. These layered blocks abstractly represent the lateral dimension at that altitude. In this scene from the Grand Tactical version of Canvas Aces, the flights shown are actually side by side rather than one above the other, as portrayed more literally on the right by the deluxe plastic towers which I've made for my own game set. The 2 flights of Sopwith Pups are at the same height, but 1,200 yards abreast. This system reintroduces the crucial third dimension, sacrificed by the novel side-scrolling abstraction in the parent games. The other key feature of my conversions is the simple tracking of aircraft speed, without the usual off-board record keeping. Each fighter in the tactical variant of Canvas Aces has 2 tracking dice, which record 6 different kinetic energies, KE, each separated by 6 energy increments, which are tracked on the smaller die. The colour of the smaller die shows whether the pilot is veteran, experienced or novice. I provide a data card for each fighter type, showing its armament and how many energy increments it gains or loses in each manoeuvre. Rotary engine planes, like the Sopwith Camel, lose less energy turning right due to engine torque. As shown on the tables, fighters with higher KE will move more columns and may climb and dive further. Planes may also weave 1 or 2 blocks laterally within each box, and weaving after moving just 1 column allows them to turn through 180 degrees and so swap between the 2 headings portrayed in the game. Hence, fighters whose KE is 4 or more can fly 3 columns straight ahead, or rise 2 rows in a zoom climb, but they have to make wider turns due to G-forces at their high speed. Some aircraft are prohibited from accelerating to KEs of 5 or 6 during steep dives due to the risk of their weak wing structure collapsing under the strain. A major innovation in the deluxe editions of Dogfight and Canvas Aces is that planes can pay an extra energy increment to attempt a tight turn to escape or engage less maneuverable opponents. Tight turns allow fighters to reverse heading rapidly in the first part of their move and so have time left to fly back into an adjacent block of their original column. Canvas Aces is the first of my conversions to contain a complete random scenario generation system, covering the full range of air battles on the Western Front. I add 2 new French bomber or recon aircraft types for better representation of earlier or later combats. My scenario generation system now covers all versions of the game, and the rules include 2 complete illustrated sample games created using this random system. A raid by several RFC flights on a German airfield defended by fighters and anti-aircraft guns in winter 1917-18, and a solitaire duel between an experienced French SPAD 7 pilot and a German DFW C-5 recon plane with inexperienced crew earlier in 1917. My favourite period of the Western Front Air War is 1915-16, when RFC aircrew in their notoriously slow and vulnerable BE-2 reconnaissance machines faced the Fokker scourge of German Eindecker monoplanes piloted by legendary aces like Max Immelmann and Oswald Bölker, with their synchronized guns firing forward through the propeller arc. This traumatic period was memorably captured in the 1970s TV series, Wings. I hence choose to focus this new solitaire sample game on a duel at the start of 1916 between a veteran Fokker Eindecker pilot and an experienced BE-2 crew like those shown in the series. As my data card shows, the Fokker E-3 is by no means an outstanding aircraft, and actually has the worst performance of any fighter in the game, with almost any manoeuvre except a 1-column move straight ahead draining its precious stock of energy, and with steep dives or tight turns impractical due to its flimsy airframe. Against a later recon plane, like the Sopwith Strutter or RE-8, it would be hopelessly outmatched. But the BE-2 is too slow to escape the Eindecker, and its observer's defensive gun has to be fired from the front cockpit over the head of the pilot behind. These limitations, and my Fokker's superior pilot, mean that my handicap falls to 2. So to win the game, I must hit the BE-2 twice within the 20 turns available without suffering even a single hit myself. If the British observer gets lucky and scores a hit during my attacks, the best I can achieve is a draw. I start the solitaire variant in the default initial position, at the same altitude as the BE2 in row 6, and pursuing it from a matching middle block 3 columns behind, as shown. My Fokker's initial KE is 2, but due to its poor performance, I have just one energy increment, like the BE2 itself, so my initial energy is 2.1. Recon planes in the solitaire variant do not track their own KE. Instead, they automatically dive 1 row if their increments fall below 1, and climb 1 row if their increments rise above 6, thereby using the same single tracking die system as in the Grand Tactical version of the game. As in my other designs, each plane is activated in turn and attacks at the end of its own move. This simple I go, you go sequence avoids the need for the initiative determination or simultaneous movement plotting used in other air games. The leapfrog dynamic which it creates allows combat to take place in the same block, thereby greatly simplifying the modelling of tail chases, since the pursuer need only make exactly the same move as his quarry to stay on its tail. With more planes per side, the system also allows aircraft to cover their colleagues, and perhaps even to form the defensive circles used frequently in both world wars to provide mutual protection. On a d6 roll of 4, the sun is shining down from my front right as shown, so it may come in useful if the BE2 reverses heading and I can get above it despite my Eindecker's painfully slow climbing performance. On turn 1, I opt to make my maximum forward move at a KE of 2, straight forward 2 columns without weaving. I also opt to dive the maximum 1 row at this KE, so as to increase speed and catch the BE2 as quickly as possible. To distinguish the lateral and vertical components of manoeuvres more clearly, I now show them through separate vectors, with horizontal movement shown first in red or black, followed by any climbs or dives in white. I lose 1 increment for the 2-column move, but gain 6 increments for the dive, so my energy increases by 5 net increments to 2.6. Recon planes in the solitaire subvariant roll a d6 each turn, and use the table shown to decide which manoeuvre they make. This randomized system is much quicker and simpler than the sophisticated nested priorities used by AI fighter pilots in my Fighter Duel Deluxe conversion, but it still offers a stiff challenge. The one crucial variation in the Recon plane's manoeuvres is that if the attacking fighter is behind, below, or in the opposite heading, the Recon pilot will not circle to throw off the enemy's aim on a roll of 1 or 2, but will switch to the asterisked move and fly forward to try to outdistance the fighter instead. Most Recon aircraft fly 2 columns in this event, but slow planes like the BE2 fly just 1 column to avoid losing too much height due to their greater drag losses, as shown at the bottom of the table. Recon planes which have a forward gun will automatically manoeuvre onto their attacker's own tail if ever given the chance. But since BE2s lacked such a forward gun, I do not have to worry about such turning of the tables in the current scenario. The BE2 rolls a 1, which would normally trigger a right turn. But since my Fokker is still behind him, the British pilot switches to his asterisk manoeuvre and flies 1 column straight forward instead to try to remain out of reach. As with my own aircraft, this is the one manoeuvre which lets the BE2 gain a little energy, so its increments increase to 2. Although I start turn 2 2 columns behind my quarry, I cannot fly 2 columns and climb to engage the British plane, since the combination of deceleration and angled movement when climbing force me to choose manoeuvres available at a KE 1 lower than I actually possess, and at KE 1 I could fly only 1 column forward. I hence maintain altitude instead, and fly another 2 columns straight ahead, with my energy falling by another increment to 2.5. This puts me in the classic blind spot, in the block directly below my opponent, and will prevent him turning even though I'm no longer behind him. There's hence a 50% chance that he will fly 1 column straight ahead again, as he did last turn, allowing me to launch the ideal climbing attack which fighters sought to achieve against two-seaters, using the enemy's own tail assembly to block the observer's fire. The BE-2 pilot rolls a 3, so I'm lucky, and he does indeed continue flying 1 column straight ahead, with his increments increasing by 1 more, to 3. On turn 3, the reduction in effective KE when climbing now works in my favour, since it allows me to move just 1 column straight ahead for my attack without needing to cut my engine to slow down. I gain 1 increment for the manoeuvre, but lose 6 increments for the climb, so my energy drops to 1.6 as I prepare my first attack of the game. Combat in Canvas Aces is resolved by a single D10 roll, which is shared when both sides fire as they do in this case, so that good or bad luck affects both equally. In the tactical variant, each side applies the modifiers shown. Both planes benefit from the +1 for being in the same heading. I have no further modifiers, but the British observer has -1 because my better pilot can jink to evade his fire, and a further -2 because of the twin impedances created by the limited traverse of his weapon and by my own attack from directly behind and below. His net modifier is hence -2. So by attacking from this angle, my veteran pilot runs no risk of the return hit which would prevent me winning the game. Unfortunately, the common D10 roll of 3 rises only to 4 for my own attack, so I'm well short of the 9 or more which I need to inflict a hit myself. As on turn 1, the British pilot rolls a 1, but this time there's no question of trying to outdistance my fighter, so he carries out an evasive right turn after all. The BE-2 moves 1 column ahead, weaves 1 block right, and reverses heading. It loses 3 increments for this turning manoeuvre, so despite its energy gains on turns 1 and 2, it must dive 1 row due to turn drag as its tracking die cycles back round to 6. The recon plane ends its move on the front board section, but because it's reversed heading, the back section is not cycled to the front as it would have been had the BE-2 maintained its original heading. On turn 4, I could circle down after the two-seater, but the attack penalty for turning would offset my bonus for ending in the same heading, while the British observer would have a clearer field of fire and so would hit me on a roll of 10. I could avoid this risk by weaving down for a head-on attack instead, taking advantage of the BE-2's lack of a forward gun, but such a fleeting pass would leave me facing in the wrong direction and waste several turns while I caught up with my fleeing quarry. In either attack, a roll of 8 would cause my gun to jam without inflicting a hit to compensate. I hence decide to circle right, but to stay above the two-seater for now, ready to dive down on a future turn. At least my rotary engine Fokker loses only 2 rather than 3 energy increments in this right-hand turn, but my energy still drops to a pitiful 1.4. The BE-2 pilot rolls yet another 1, so he continues his right turn and completes a full circle to return to his original heading in the middle block 1 row below where he started. He loses another 3 energy increments, leaving him with 3. On turn 5, I have essentially the same options which I had on turn 4. Although time is inexorably ticking away, I opt to continue my own higher circle, in the hope that the BE-2 will straighten out at last, and so allow me to conduct a more effective diving attack. My energy drops another 2 increments to 1.2, leaving me on the brink of stalling. The British pilot is clearly pleased with the effectiveness of his circling tactics, since on a roll of 2 he reverses his bank and circles left instead, into the left block of the column ahead. The further 3 increment drag loss forces a dive to row 4, with increments cycling back to 6. As on turn 3, the BE2's heading change means that no board rotation occurs. On turn 6, I no longer have an attack option, since I can dive just 1 row at my minimal KE. I hence reverse bank myself and make my own diving left turn to regain a position 1 row above my quarry. The 6 increment gain for the dive is sorely needed, but I lose 3 of the increments for circling in the opposite direction to my engine torque, so my energy increases only to 1.5 despite the altitude loss. The BE2 pilot rolls a 3, so he levels his wings at last and flies 1 column straight back. The 1 increment gain means that he climbs back to row 5, ending his manoeuvre directly ahead of my fighter. On turn 7, I consider diving into the 2-seater's blind spot in the hope of setting up another risk-free climbing attack like that on turn 3. But since time is passing quickly, I decide that it's better to stick with the bird in hand and to brave the enemy return fire by attacking this turn instead. I close with the BE2 and accelerate by 1 increment to an energy of 1.6. The combat modifiers are the same as on turn 3, except that I'm less shielded by the enemy's tail assembly, so the observer's net modifier is -1 rather than -2. On a common D10 roll of 5, the result is the same, and neither plane scores a significant hit. On a D6 roll of 6, the British pilot decides to change tack, and to speed up rather than circle to evade my attacks. He flies 2 columns straight ahead and loses 2 increments, forcing him back down to row 4. Frustratingly, this is the only one of his 6 possible manoeuvres which prevents me staying on his tail at my KE of 1. On turn 8, I make the best of the situation by flying the maximum 1 column straight back and diving 1 row. The 1 increment gain for the manoeuvre adds to the 6 increments from the dive to take my energy to its highest ever total of 3.1, which should allow me to catch the BE2 again next turn unless it makes another 2-column move. On a roll of 3, the British pilot actually makes his most likely manoeuvre when my fighter is behind, namely 1 column straight ahead. His increments increase only to 6, which is a shame, since if he'd climbed back to row 5, I could have used my KE of 3 for a 2-column zoom climb to re-engage him while remaining safe from his observer's gunfire. On turn 9, I again reject the safe but time-consuming option of diving into the 2-seater's blind spot, and instead I fly 2 columns straight back to attack him at once. My energy falls by 1 increment to 2.6, which is good, since it should allow me to continue attacking the British plane next turn without needing to cut my engine and lose precious energy to avoid overshooting. The modifiers are the same as on turn 7, and on a D10 roll of 4, so is the ineffective outcome. On another roll of 6, the BE2 pilot returns to his previously successful tactic of trying to outdistance my underpowered Eindecker for a while by flying a further 2 columns straight back. This time, he can absorb the 2 increment loss by falling to 4 increments without having to dive another row. However, my energy of 2.6 is now more than enough to stay on his tail regardless. On turn 10, I make my own 2-column move straight back for my 4th attack of the game. My energy falls by another increment to 2.5. This time I finally strike lucky with a D10 roll of 8. My score rises to 9 thanks to the +1 bonus for being in the same heading as the enemy, so I narrowly inflict my first hit, while the British observer fails to score on a modified roll of 7. The downside of my success is that my fighter's gun jams on a natural roll of 8, so I will have to fix this jam before returning to the attack to inflict the second hit which I need to avoid losing the game. I move the BE2's die ahead of the counter to record the hit it sustained, and I move my KE die to the top of the block to indicate my gun jam. Shaken by my hit, the British pilot rolls 2, and so circles left into the middle block to try to avoid further attacks. Even the 3 increment loss for the turn leaves him just clinging on in row 4 with 1 increment left. Board rotation is once again preempted by the BE2's heading change. As the game reaches its halfway point after 1 scale minute of action, both planes have lost around 400 feet of altitude due to the constant manoeuvring. I am halfway to my victory goal, but my gun jam is a serious setback which will make it difficult to score the further hit I need within the 10 turns remaining. On turn 11, I decide not to circle after the BE2 at once, but instead to try to fix my gun jam. A key rule in Canvas Aces and Fighter Duel is that non-veteran pilots may occasionally lose situational awareness and be forced to level out while they regain their bearings. By accepting this constraint voluntarily, pilots in Canvas Aces may take their hands off the controls and try to clear a jammed gun, succeeding on a D10 roll of 7 or more. I fly 2 columns straight ahead, and my energy falls by 1 increment to 2.4. But on a roll of 5, my gun remains inoperable. I will have to suspend my efforts next turn so as to circle back towards the fleeing recon plane, but I hope to clear the jam thereafter as I gradually close the range during my pursuit. On a D6 roll of 3, the British pilot makes his likeliest manoeuvre 1 column straight ahead, with his increments rising to 2. Although this gives me less distance to catch up, it means that the BE2 maintains altitude for now, and so gives me less scope to dive to increase my pursuit speed. On turn 12, I circle left just in time to avoid flying off the board. I could dive to row 3 anyway, so as to catch up more quickly, and perhaps make another attack from the observer's blind spot. But this risks me overtaking the BE2 before I manage to fix my gun. I decide instead to maintain altitude, despite the risk of not being able to re-engage in time. This is another example of the tactical dilemmas and trade-offs which the game repeatedly presents. My energy falls by 3 increments to just 2.1 due to the unfavourable direction of my turn. Had I turned right instead, it would have cost me just 2 increments, and I could have paid an extra increment to attempt a tight turn back into my original column. My veteran pilot would have succeeded on a D6 roll of 5 or 6, but the cost of ending in the far left rather than the middle block greatly outweighs any possible gain. The British pilot rolls 4 and so makes his first weaving manoeuvre of the game, flying 1 column ahead and weaving into the right block. He loses an increment due to the BE2's poor performance, but still just maintains his existing altitude. On turn 13, I fly 2 columns straight forward as I resume my efforts to clear my gun jam. On a D10 roll of 2, the gun remains blocked, and my 1 increment loss takes my energy down to 1.6, so I will fly only 1 column next turn. On a roll of 6, the BE2 pilot capitalizes on my limited speed by flying 2 columns to increase his separation still further. His 2 increment loss means that he finally dives to row 3 with 5 increments. In hindsight, it looks as if diving myself last turn would have been a better choice after all. On turn 14, I face another painful dilemma: whether to continue working on my gun or to take back the Fokker's controls instead so as to dive after my quarry. Since fixing the gun will be useless if I never get back into range, I decide to make a diving right weave to regain a position directly behind the BE2, albeit a daunting 3 columns away even after my own move. The 6 increment gain for the dive boosts my energy to a much healthier 2.6. The British pilot rolls 4 and so makes another right weave. To keep the recon plane in the middle 3 blocks, and so make the board in this scenario truly endless, this manoeuvre requires that both aircraft be shifted 1 block left as shown. So my fighter is returned to the middle block. The BE-2 loses 1 increment, leaving it with 4. On turn 15, my Fokker flies 2 columns straight ahead, while my veteran pilot turns his attention yet again to his jammed gun. On a roll of 8, the jam is finally cleared, and my only priority becomes closing to re-engage the British plane before the turn limit expires. My energy falls by 1 increment to 2.5. On a roll of 2, the BE-2 pilot replaces his normal left turn with his asterisk manoeuvre 1 column straight ahead because of my position behind his plane. I'm glad he did not move or weave further, though his increments rise to 5, giving him the energy needed to move further on future turns without losing height. On turn 16, I decide to fly just 1 column, so as to weave directly behind the 2-seater once again. Had I flown 2 columns straight forward instead, there would have been a 33% chance of the BE-2 weaving even further to the right, since weaves by the recon plane always increase rather than decrease the separation from a fighter behind or below. I also opt to dive to row 2 to increase my energy by 6 increments to my highest ever total of 3.5. This will allow me to weave after moving 2 columns next turn, so as to close with the BE-2 even if it makes another weave of its own. The British pilot rolls 4, so he does indeed make yet another right weave, with his increments dropping back to 4. As on turn 14, both aircraft are shifted 1 column left to keep the BE-2 within the middle 3 blocks. Since the 2-seater has now entered the front board section without reversing heading, the back section is cycled to the front, so as to keep the recon plane centered in this dimension also. On turn 17, I duly make my weaving 2-column move to regain a position behind the 2-seater, though the 3-increment cost of this manoeuvre cuts my energy back to 3.2. There is a 50% chance that the enemy plane will fly 1 column straight ahead, allowing me to make a 2-column climb next turn to re-engage it at last while remaining safe from the observer's gunfire. Unfortunately, the British pilot picks this moment to roll a 6 and move 2 columns forward, with his increments falling to 2. He hence remains out of reach of my attack for another precious turn. On turn 18, I make my own 2-column move straight ahead to regain the same relative position compared to the BE-2, in the hope that he will fly just 1 column next turn and allow me to close the range at last. My energy falls by 1 increment to 3.1, the bare minimum which will permit a 2-column climbing attack. The British pilot rolls a 3, so luckily for me he does make his standard move 1 column straight ahead, with his increments rising to 3. This will allow me to re-engage him at last with just 2 turns left to play. The backboard section cycles to the front again to keep the BE-2 in the centre of the board. On turn 19, I fly 2 columns straight ahead and climb 1 row into the same block as the BE-2, with an effective KE of 2. I lose 1 increment for the manoeuvre and 6 increments for the climb, so my energy falls all the way to 1.6. As in my ideal opening attack on turn 3, my modifier is +1, while the British observer's modifier is -2. So, on a D10 roll of 8, 9 or 10, I will score a second hit without reply and win the game. The roll is actually 3, so everything will come down to the final turn. If the BE-2 pilot rolls another 6, he will outdistance my Fokker with its KE of 1 as he did on turn 7, and the game will be lost. His actual roll is 2, so he responds to my attack by circling left into the middle block. The 3-increment loss for the turn manoeuvre forces the two-seater to dive, but to keep it above row 2, both aircraft are shifted 1 row up, as shown. This is the final dimension of the system used in the Solitaire subvariant to ensure that the recon plane remains in the heart of the board, whatever manoeuvre it makes. On turn 20, I could circle down after the BE-2 for my final attack, but the fire penalty for turning means that I would win the game only on a roll of 9, while on a 10, the enemy observer would hit me back, so the result will be a draw. Since there will be no more combats, I decide instead to take advantage of the British plane's lack of a forward gun and make a diving left weave without turning, so as to set up a one-off head-on pass. The 6-increment gain for the dive takes my energy to 2.6. The downside of this choice is that, as in Dogfight Deluxe, head-on passes leave no time for effective fire if a D6 roll is less than the KE of either plane, treating the recon plane's KE as 2. My roll of 2 is just enough to avoid this fate, so I proceed to resolve my unopposed head-on attack. No modifiers apply, so I will win the game at the last moment on a D10 roll of 9 or 10. The actual roll is a 6. So the plucky RFC crew cheat the Fokker Scourge on this occasion and escape with only minor damage, despite the notorious vulnerability of their craft. In the end, I lose the game, due to mediocre luck, suboptimal tactics, and my Eindecker's own serious performance limitations. It is clear from both of my solitaire sample games that the turn limit forms a key part of the challenge which the player faces in this sub-variant. The time constraint abstractly reflects the limited ammo and fuel of the fighter, and the chance that the recon plane can escape into cloud or be rescued by a passing friendly scout if it can hold out for long enough. The player must hence strike a judicious balance between minimizing the risk of return fire or unrewarded gun jams and launching sufficient attacks to drive the two-seater down within the time available. Luck plays a realistically high role in the game, allowing simple and dramatic reflection of the danger and confusion of air combat. But good tactics are also key, and one false move can make victory unattainable due to the unforgiving 3D physics of the contest. I hope you've enjoyed this introduction to Canvas Aces Deluxe, and that it has given you a clearer sense of how the systems work and how the game plays. As I said, this and several of the other games and conversions I've designed recently are shared for free on my Simulating War IO group and on the Board Game Geek pages for their parent games. The video description has a link to my new website, which has further details, pictures and download links for my many designs. Of particular relevance here are my 2 World War II air combat conversions, especially since Winged Leader owners may play them both using the components provided in the Canvas Aces Deluxe add-on for the 2nd edition of Winged Victory. Dogfight Deluxe offers a more focused grand tactical model than in Winged Leader of the fighting between interceptors and escorts in the immediate vicinity of the bomber formation. It uses the data cards and plane counters from the Winged Leader series, and the same sky board, cloud panels and tracking dice as in Canvas Aces. The reintroduction of the 3rd dimension allows flights of fighters to chase one another's tails explicitly rather than just abstractly, especially with the new tight turn system, which lets more agile fighters escape or evade clumsier adversaries. I showcase the gameplay in Dogfight Deluxe in a companion video to this one, illustrating a complete engagement from the Battle of Britain in 1940. Dogfight's much more tactical, top-down partner game, Fighter Duel Deluxe, covers battles between flights of 2 to 4 individual fighters. It may now be played on a large hex-gridded board, like that provided on the back of the skyboard included in my Winged Victory add-on, using the data cards and single plane counters from Winged Leader. As shown, These counters have the great advantage that they may be laid on their side or sandwiched upright to give a direct representation of the contending fighter's bank attitude. My unique solitaire system for Fighter Duel has now been expanded to let you put any or all pilots on one or both sides under AI control, allowing you to use proper formation tactics against the AI, to team up and fly cooperatively instead of head-to-head, or to fly a single plane in a large dogfight, as in air combat computer games. This is the only board game system I know which provides dedicated solitaire rules for manoeuvring combat between flights of individual fighters. It remains only to thank Carlo Amadeo and WBS Games for creating the beautiful Winged Victory components which inspired me to extend my conversions back to World War I, and for including my resulting Canvas Aces design as an add-on for the second edition of Winged Victory. With this add-on, owners of both Winged Victory and Winged Leader may now refight almost any daylight air battle from 1916 to 1945, at any scale, from individual planes to entire squadron and wing formations. Enjoy.